The deadliest civil war in human history, the Taiping Rebellion, broke out in the middle of the 19th century. What started as a small sect of violent Christians quickly transformed into a rampaging army of more than 2 million. And buddy, things got bloody. In 1814, history's deadliest religious leader was born. Hong Xiuquan inspired the Taipings to rebel and plunge China into years of chaos. But Hong wasn't born an arch manipulator. Instead, he had the fortune to be born in a society all but ready for a spectacular collapse. 1814 China was ruled by the Qing dynasty. Although they'd initially been dynamic rulers, their society had become rigid and dogmatic. There had been no infrastructure improvements to China for 100 years, even as the population tripled. On top of that, the strict Confucian code sorted people into classes they couldn't escape. This resulted in a society of people trapped in miserable poverty with no hope of bettering themselves. Things were even worse for the Hakka class, of which Hong Xiuquan was a member. A group of internal migrants who'd fled the Mongol invasions back in the 13th century, the Hakka were still treated as outsiders and were ready to rebel against their Qing overlords.
Many sources deride the Taiping as vulgar outsiders. Such sources were just as likely, however, to criticize the dynasty for its atrocities and destruction.
Although most people were stuck in their particular societal class, an exit did exist. The Imperial Exam could be taken by almost anyone, and passing it meant not just money for you, but for your entire village. But test takers rarely passed. The Imperial Exam was almost a religion in Hong's time, a way to bring both honor and money to your entire village. But it was also widely hated. There are contemporary poems about men driving themselves mad trying to pass. Still, people kept on trying, including people like Hong Xiuquan. Hong's community recognized from an early age that he was extremely intelligent. They banded together to pay for his tuition and basically bet their life savings on this one child passing the test. It exerted tremendous pressure on the young boy's mind and laid the groundwork for his future actions. By 1837, Hong had taken the exam 3 times, and each time he failed, and the young man did not take failure lightly. After the 3rd exam, Hong was confined to bed, during which time he was racked with visions. According to accounts, he went into the sky and met a great man with a long beard who told him to slay all the demons on Earth. He is also said to have met with a middle-aged man who instructed Hong in martial arts. By the time Hong awoke, days had passed. 5 years later, Hong had just failed the Imperial Exam for the 4th time when a cousin gave him a pamphlet on Christianity. Reading it, Hong realized the old man in his vision had been God and the middle-aged man was Jesus. Hong also realized that he was Jesus' Chinese brother, put on Earth to exterminate all demons, starting with the Qing. Right after Hong started dreaming about Jesus, something happened that would break the last bonds holding his nation together, the First Opium War. British merchants, mainly the East India Company, annoyed that China wouldn't buy their goods, had begun smuggling opium into the Middle Kingdom. When the Qing found out, they confiscated and burned the opium. In retaliation, the British annexed as much territory as they could. The First Opium War was a drawn-out conflict that resulted in the British repeatedly defeating the Chinese. The Royal Navy devastated the Qing, seriously damaging their prestige. Eventually, the war came to an end, with China decidedly the losing side. Aside from netting Hong Kong, the British won the right to flood the nation with opium, making the addiction crisis even worse. But there was another side effect to the Opium War. The 1842 peace treaty made it easier for Protestant missionaries to enter the nation. Suddenly, a whole bunch of Chinese peasants were aware of Christianity in a way they'd never been before. Despite the influx of Christianity, most people ignored Hong's preaching, but his teachings did find a solid audience among his fellow Hakka. His people formed a militia loyal to Hong known as the God Worshippers. By 1850, Hong was preaching a message of economic opportunity that resonated with Imperial China's poor and downtrodden. Inside this message was a not-so-secret call to arms. Hong offered free land to potential followers and a kind of proto-communism to live under, both of which involved overthrowing the Qing. Eventually, the ruling class realized this and sent soldiers to deal with the God Worshippers. When the Qing armies faced the militia, the trained soldiers completely fell apart. Amazed, Hong and his rebels decided to press their advantage. They fought all the way up the Yangtze River, gathering more followers until some 2 million were marching behind Hong. In 1853, this gigantic army reached the former imperial capital of Nanjing and overran it. From a Hakka nobody, Hong was suddenly in charge of southern China. Once in Nanjing, Hong declared the creation of the Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace, which was built on Christian principles. However, his actual policy was much more violent and punitive. You could be beheaded for singing raunchy songs, for smoking opium, for, quote, casting amorous glances, and for having lustful thoughts. But Hong went even further. He made it an offense for even married couples to have sex. All of this while Hong sat on his own solid gold throne.
Conscripts had the name of the Taiping regime forcibly tattooed on their faces.
At the same time, the new kingdom engaged in some truly bizarre behavior. Hong and his lieutenants would decide state policy in religious trances, then have their proclamations issued as poems that gangs of women were forced to memorize and sing in public. But even this weirdness couldn't hide the Taiping's brutality. Public torture and executions were part of daily life in the heavenly capital. One king who displeased Hong had his entire extended family butchered and his head paraded around on a pole. Despite the horrible acts and corrupt rule of Hong's kingdom, Western society did nothing to help and certainly didn't make the situation better. In the US, the Christian nature of the Heavenly Kingdom, despite its heretical belief that Hong Xiquang was actually related to Jesus, became a cause to support. The book Autumn in the Heavenly Kingdom describes how American Christians began agitating for their government to support the Taipings, with the New York Times even writing editorials in Hong's favor. Over in Europe, it was less the Christianity and more the radical nature of Taiping society that people warmed to. Karl Marx and the continent's hardline liberals all saw Hong's devotion to land rights and economic equality as the very thing they'd been agitating for decades. Even the British, who relied on a stable China to keep buying their opium, basically shrugged their shoulders. Had things turned out differently, it's possible the Taipings might have become recognized as China's legitimate rulers. Unfortunately, the former rulers of China, the Qing, were in no position to fight off Hong's people. With remarkably bad timing, the Second Opium War kicked off in 1856 while the Taipings were still rampaging across southern China. The Imperial Army found itself going toe-to-toe with Hong's army and with France and Great Britain. The Second Opium War was even more nakedly self-serving than the first. Seeing the Qing tied up fighting the deadliest civil war in human history, London used the conflict as an opportunity to seize more land in China. The murder of a French priest convinced Paris to join the fray, leading to another great European carve-up of Chinese territory. The Second Opium War ended in 1860 after killing tens of thousands and hobbling China just when it needed all its resources to take on the Taipings. The ink had barely dried on the treaty ending the Second Opium War when the US began marching toward its own civil conflict in April 1861. And that's important to the history of the Taiping Rebellion because the US Civil War had the small side effect of crashing Britain's cotton market. In the 19th century, northern England had placed itself firmly at the center of a textiles trade that started in the Deep South's cotton plantations and ended with the Chinese buying British cloth. As the book Autumn in the Heavenly Kingdom shows, the Taiping Rebellion badly dented that market. When the US Civil War also exploded, London was suddenly faced with significant civil disorder in Britain's now penniless northern cities. Not wanting a rebellion of their own, the British were left with two options: interfere in the US Civil War or interfere in China. After briefly flirting with the idea of getting involved with the Confederacy, the British instead decided to intervene in China. By the early 1860s, the Qing were through with the rules of war. They resorted to fighting using the same nasty strategies as the Taiping rebels. The Qing approach was twofold. First, Beijing allowed warlords to raise massive armies provided they used them to fight the Taipings. These armies were as efficient and as brutal as warlords tend to be. The second approach was to use British warfare techniques to systematically exterminate the Taipings. The Qing set up vast sieges of cities across all 18 provinces with a Taiping presence, cutting them off so effectively and for so long that the inhabitants were forced to resort to cannibalism. But that was just the start. Once the starved cities surrendered, the Qing mass executed everyone inside. The most notorious massacre was at Nanjing. After a 2-year siege, the Taipings surrendered, only for the Qing to chop the heads off every single man inside the walls. The women, about 10,000 in all, were carried off as prizes. 600 cities were completely annihilated over the course of the war. By 1864, the Qing had chased the Taipings all the way back into their capital and laid siege to Nanjing. When the city finally fell, it would be the end of Hong and his heavenly kingdom, and both the Qing and the Taipings knew it. It might explain why the eventual conquest of Nanjing was so unbelievably bloody. Hong Xiquang himself died in the middle stages of the siege, possibly after eating some poisonous berries, maybe believing they were manna from God. But the real horrors came when the Qing finally breached the city walls. Over the next 3 days, they effectively razed Nanjing to the ground. By the time the dust had settled, it's thought that 100,000 people had been killed. The Taipings didn't go quietly. Groups of fanatical true believers gathered in the last hours of the city and set themselves on fire rather than be captured. Men, women, and children all died in the inferno. It's entirely possible that this was history's deadliest battle before World War I. By way of comparison, 7,058 soldiers were killed at Gettysburg. Although pockets of resistance would keep fighting for another 2 years, the fall of Nanjing and the death of Hong effectively ended the Taiping Rebellion. The Qing regained control of China, and the Middle Kingdom enjoyed its last decades of stability before the 20th century changed everything again. Today, this mostly forgotten civil war is generally estimated to have killed between 20 and 30 million people. To put that in perspective, that's up to 30 times the number killed in the US Civil War. World War I, a war fought with machine guns, heavy artillery tanks, and poison gas, killed only around 20 million. And these are just the generally accepted estimates. At the higher end, 70 million people may have died in the Taiping Rebellion. Were a war to kill 70 million people today, it'd almost be 1% of the entire global population. In the world of 1860, with a population at roughly 1.2 billion, it was over 5%.
The Taiping Rebellion is a huge war. I mean, one of the biggest, most violent civil war in human history.
And the deaths didn't stop there. The book Autumn in the Heavenly Kingdom argues that Chairman Mao's communist revolution was made possible by the failure of the Taipings. The result was the Chinese Civil War and one of the deadliest dictatorships in history. Hong Xiuquan may have died in 1864, but his memory killed millions over a century later. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about world history are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.